Luke Harper's hands didn't shake when he faced trouble, but they shook the morning he rode into Willow Creek and heard a pregnant woman being auctioned off in broad daylight like she was a head of livestock. This is a story about a man with nothing left to lose and a woman who had everything stripped from her. One decision made under a summer sun that changed two broken lives forever. If this story moves you, please subscribe, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1874 sat heavy on the Montana plains like a wet wool blanket, and Luke Harper hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. His horse, a gray-muzzled quarter horse named Dust, moved slow down the main road of Willow Creek with a kind of tired that matched his rider, bone deep and quiet. Luke had $42 to his name, a cracked saddle, and a homestead outside of town that was more dirt than dream. He wasn't the kind of man who looked for trouble. He wasn't the kind of man who looked for much of anything anymore. He heard it before he saw it. Voices. Too many of them, overlapping, sharp at the edges. He reined Dust to a stop near the general store and looked toward the sound. A crowd had gathered behind the building, maybe 30 people, fanning out in a loose semicircle. Men in suspenders, women in faded calico, a few ranch hands leaning on the fence rail. And at the center of that circle stood a woman. She was young, maybe 24, 25, pale from the heat or from fear, or maybe from carrying that child low and heavy in front of her. Her dark hair was pinned back, but coming loose at the temples. She wore a plain brown dress, and her hands, both of them, were pressed flat against her belly, like she was trying to hold the whole world together from the inside. Beside her stood two men. One was stocky, red-faced, with a mustache that twitched when he talked. The other was younger, lean, with eyes that moved too quick and didn't hold still. Between them was a wooden crate turned upside down, and on that crate was a handwritten sign Luke couldn't read from where he sat. He climbed down from Dust and looped the reins over the post. He walked close enough to hear. "Terms are simple," the red-faced man was saying, loud enough for the whole crowd. "The woman is a widow, my brother's widow. She's got no means, no property, no family of her own. The land reverts to us by law. What she needs is a husband willing to take on her and the child both. We are offering a fair settlement to any man who'll claim her today." Somebody in the crowd laughed, low and mean. Luke stopped walking. He looked at the woman again. She wasn't crying. He half expected her to be, but she wasn't. Her jaw was set hard, and her eyes were dry and very, very still, fixed somewhere past the crowd, past the fence, past the whole sorry town. She looked like a woman who had already gone somewhere else, inside herself, just to survive standing there. That look. Luke knew that look. He'd worn it himself once. "What's the settlement?" a man near the front called out. 40 acres of bottomland and the use of the Reynolds wagon and team for 1 season, the red-faced man said. "In exchange, the man takes full responsibility for the woman and the child. The land stays in the family name. She signs over her claim today." "She signs over her claim," a woman in the crowd repeated, quiet and horrified. "That's legal?" another man asked. "Legal enough," the younger one said, and something in his smile made Luke's stomach turn. Luke pushed forward through the people. A few of them moved without him asking. Something in the way he walked, not fast, not angry, just direct, parted the crowd like water ahead of a flat stone. He stopped 6 feet from the red-faced man. "What's her name?" Luke said. The man looked at him. "Beg your pardon?" "The woman. What's her name?" Silence dropped over the crowd. The red-faced man blinked once. "Abigail Reynolds. She's—" "I'm talking to her," Luke said. and he turned away from the man like he'd already dismissed him. And he looked straight at the woman. She looked back at him for the first time. Her eyes were gray-green and very sharp. Whatever else they'd taken from her, they hadn't taken those eyes. "Ma'am," he said, "you all right?" Something moved across her face. Surprise, maybe, or the memory of what it felt like to be asked that question and meant. She swallowed once. "I am not all right," she said, "but I'm standing." "That's something," Luke said. He kept his eyes on her. "Your name's Abigail?" "Abby," she said. "My name is Abby." Abby. He nodded once, like he was filing that away somewhere careful. "I'm Luke Harper. I've got a place 3 miles northeast, off the Ridge Road. It ain't much." He paused. "But it's mine, and nobody's selling it out from under me." The red-faced man stepped forward. "Now hold on just a minute, friend." "I'm not your friend," Luke said, still not looking at him. The man stopped. "These men your husband's family?" Luke asked Abby. "Gerald and Thomas Wilton," she said. The name came out flat and final, the way you said the name of a thing you'd stopped being afraid of. "Gerald was my husband's older brother. Thomas is his son." "And your husband?" "Daniel died 4 months ago. Fever." Her hand pressed harder against her belly. "This child never met his father." The crowd had gone very quiet. Even the flies seemed to stop. "I'm sorry for your loss," Luke said. "Are you?" She looked at him, searching. "Yes, ma'am, I am." Gerald Wilton cleared his throat. "This is a legal proceeding, and you're interrupting it, mister." "We've got every right. You've got every right to be ashamed of yourself," said the woman in the calico dress, stepping forward from the crowd. She was older, maybe 60, with strong hands and a set jaw. "Harold, don't just stand there," she said to the man beside her. "Martha," the man started. "I said don't just stand there." She crossed her arms. "This is a disgrace." "It's business," Thomas Wilton said. "It's barbaric is what it is," Martha snapped back. Voices started rising again, 2 or 3 people talking at once, and Gerald Wilton raised both hands. Folks, this is settled by law. The widow has no legal standing on the property. We are offering her a solution, a fair one. Any man who takes her gets 40 acres. "You keep saying fair," Abby said. Her voice cut through everything. Gerald blinked. "What's that?" "You keep saying it's fair." She turned and looked straight at him. Not past him this time, straight at him, and the steadiness of it seemed to startle him. "Daniel didn't leave me because he chose to. He died. He died in our bed, and I held his hand while he did it. And I buried him in the south field by the cottonwood tree, the one he planted the summer we were married. And I have been working that land every single day since, because it belongs to my child." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't waver. "There is nothing fair about what you're doing. You know that. I know that. These people know that. The only one who doesn't seem to know it is you. And I think that's because you don't want to." Complete silence. Gerald's face had gone a deep, unpleasant shade of red. The law says a widow without means can be compelled to surrender property claim when she cannot pay outstanding debts," Abby said. "What outstanding debt, Gerald? Name it. Name it right here in front of these people." His jaw worked. "There's the matter of the seed loan from spring, which I paid back in September with the corn yield. I have the receipt. And the wagon repair from March," she continued, calm as water, "which your own son damaged driving it drunk through the Jensen fence, and which I paid out of my own pocket to keep the peace." She reached into the pocket of her dress and produced a folded piece of paper. "I have that receipt, too." Thomas Wilton moved fast. He crossed the distance between them and grabbed for the paper. Luke was faster. He stepped in front of Abby, caught Thomas by the wrist, and held it. Not hard enough to hurt, hard enough to stop. "Let go of me," Thomas said, low and dangerous. "When you step back," Luke said, just as low, just as steady. The two men stood like that for a moment, eye to eye, neither one moving. And then Thomas Wilton pulled his wrist free and stepped back, one step, and looked away. And something about that told Luke everything he needed to know about the man. The crowd exhaled. Luke turned back to Abby. Her breathing had gone a little fast, but her face was still set and strong. She looked up at him with those gray-green eyes, and there was something in them now. Not gratitude exactly, too proud for that, but something. Recognition, maybe. One tired person seeing another. "You carry those receipts everywhere?" Luke asked. "Since the day after the funeral," she said. "Smart." "Necessary," she corrected. He almost smiled. Didn't quite get there, but it was close. Gerald Wilton had recovered himself. He straightened his coat and looked out over the crowd. "Regardless of minor debts, the fact remains that this woman is alone, with child, on a claim she cannot manage by herself. We are not villains here. We are family, doing what family does when one of its members is in need." "You are not her family," Martha said from the crowd. "Her family is dead." "Which is exactly why she requires to be left alone on her own land," said another voice. A rancher Luke didn't know, older, with a gray beard and a voice like gravel. "That's what she requires." 3 or 4 others nodded. Luke could feel the crowd shifting, the way a herd shifts when the lead animal changes direction. Gerald Wilton felt it too. His eyes moved quick across the faces around him, and he recalculated. "We'll take this to Judge Carraway," he said, quieter now. "This afternoon. It'll be settled proper." "Judge Carraway's in Helena till Friday," said a young man near the back, not unkindly, just stating a fact. Gerald's jaw tightened. "Then Monday." "Monday," Thomas agreed, and he looked at Abby with an expression that said, "This isn't over." Said it without words. Said it the way men like him always did. They left. Not gracefully, but they left. The crowd broke apart slowly, people drifting back toward the street, talking low among themselves. A few of them looked at Abby with pity, which Luke could tell by the set of her shoulders she didn't want. The woman named Martha came forward and touched her arm briefly. "You need anything, you come to us," she said. "You hear me?" "Thank you, Martha," Abby said. Quiet, genuine. Martha gave Luke a long, measuring look, the kind of look older women give younger men when they're deciding something, then nodded once and walked away. And then it was just Luke and Abby, standing behind the general store in the midday heat, and the sound of the town going on about its business around them, like nothing had happened at all. "Thank you," Abby said. She tucked the receipts back into her pocket with the careful hands of someone protecting irreplaceable things. "You didn't have to do that." "No," Luke agreed. "You don't know me." "No, ma'am." "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment, looking past her at the fence line, at the dry summer grass beyond it, bending in the hot wind. Then he looked back at her. "Where are you staying tonight?" She hesitated, just a half second, but he caught it. "The boarding house. Through Monday. After that—" She stopped. "After that, what?" Her chin came up. "After that, I go back to my land and I figure it out." "Alone?" "Yes." "With the baby coming when?" Another hesitation. 6 weeks, maybe 7. Luke said nothing for a moment. He was doing arithmetic in his head. Not the romantic kind, not the noble kind, just the plain, practical kind that farming men did without thinking. 6 weeks. A woman alone on a claim, in summer heat, a county away from any real help, with men like Gerald Wilton set to drag her before a judge the moment they could arrange it. "I've got a proposition," he said. Abby looked at him with immediate and unconcealed wariness. "I've had enough propositions for one day." "Not that kind," he said. And something in his tone, or maybe just in his face, made her look at him differently. "I've got land. It's not prosperous, but it's legal, and it's clean, and nobody's contesting it. I've got a house, small, but sound. I've got a well that doesn't run dry even in August." He paused. "I've got no family, no debts, and no interest in anything you don't freely offer." Abby was very still. "Say what you mean," she said. "If you were married, legally married, with a husband of record, Gerald Wilton can't compel you to surrender your claim. He'd have to go through your husband, and a judge, even Caraway, would look a whole lot harder at a case against a married woman with a legal protector than he would at a widow on her own." "You're talking about a legal arrangement," Abby said slowly. "I'm talking about a marriage," Luke said. "A real one, on paper, with a preacher. What goes on after that?" He stopped. "That's between us and nobody else. I won't make demands on you that you don't want made. But on paper, in the eyes of this town and the law, you'd be my wife, and I'd be your husband. And Gerald Wilton could go straight to the devil." The silence stretched out long. Abby looked at him with those clear, careful eyes. She was reading him the way a person reads a horizon before weather, looking for what was true and what was just light playing tricks. "You don't know me," she said again, softer this time. "I know you stood up in front of 30 people and quoted your receipts from memory while his hands were shaking," Luke said. "I know you didn't cry. I know you had those papers in your pocket because you knew this was coming, and you prepared." He met her eyes. "That tells me enough." "What does it tell you?" "That you're the kind of woman worth standing next to," he said simply. Abby's throat worked. She looked away. In the silence, Luke could hear a mockingbird somewhere over the rooftops going through its whole repertoire. One song, then another, like it had all the time in the world. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "What do you get out of it?" "A neighbor who won't rob me or gossip about me," he said. "And maybe, someday, if we're both willing, something more than that. But that's not a condition. That's just an honest thing to say." She turned back to him. Her eyes were wet now, finally, though the tears hadn't fallen. "This is—" She stopped, started again. "This is the strangest day of my life." "Mine too," Luke said. "And I once woke up with a rattlesnake in my boot." She laughed. It surprised them both. Short, real, unguarded. And then it was gone, and she was serious again. But something had shifted. Something small and significant. The way a door shifts when a latch gives. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I loved my husband. I'm not looking for a replacement." "I'm not asking to be one," Luke said. "And this child is yours," he said firmly. "Completely and entirely yours. I'd never pretend otherwise." "But you'd acknowledge it legally?" Her eyes were searching. "If you want me to, whatever protects you both." She pressed her lips together and looked down at her hands, those careful, work-rough hands still resting against her belly. Luke waited. He was good at waiting. A man who farmed dry Montana land learned patience the same way he learned everything else. From necessity. Finally, she looked up. "Where's your preacher?" Something moved through Luke Harper. Not quite relief, not quite joy. something older and quieter than both. "Reverend Calkins," he said, "2 blocks north. He'll still be in his office this time of day." "You know this for certain?" "I've passed his window every Friday noon for 3 years," Luke said. "He's always there, eats his lunch and reads." "Today's Thursday." "He's there on Thursdays too," Luke said. "Man's very predictable." She almost smiled again. Almost. "All right," she said. "All right, Luke Harper." She said his name like she was testing the weight of it. "Let's go find your predictable preacher." They walked side by side through the back of town, not touching, leaving a respectable foot of distance between them. The heat pressed down on everything, and the summer sky was pale and enormous overhead, and the whole world smelled of dust and dry grass, and something faintly sweet. Clover, maybe, from the field at the edge of town. Luke walked with his hands loose at his sides. He wasn't thinking about the future. Wasn't thinking much at all. He was just walking, and beside him walked a woman he didn't know, carrying a child that wasn't his, into a life he hadn't planned, on a Thursday afternoon in July. And for the first time in a very long while, Luke Harper felt like he was walking in the right direction. Reverend Calkins looked up from his desk when they came through the door. He was a small man with large glasses and ink on his fingers, and the expression of someone who had long since made peace with being surprised by the people of Willow Creek. "Luke," he said. Then he looked at Abby, and at the shape of her, and back at Luke. "Well," he said. "Reverend," Luke said, "we need a marriage, today if you're willing." The Reverend set down his pen very carefully. "Today?" "Yes, sir." "May I ask?" He looked at Abby. "Abigail Reynolds," she said. "Soon to be Harper, I suppose." She said it calmly. Practical. Like a woman rearranging furniture in a house she'd decided to live in. The Reverend looked at Luke for a long moment, and Luke met his gaze steadily, and something passed between them. A question and an answer, both given without speaking. Reverend Calkins stood up. "I'll need 2 witnesses," he said. "I expect Harold and Martha Greer will do." He went to the window and opened it. Across the street, visible through a gap between buildings, Martha Greer was sweeping her front step. "Martha!" he called. She looked up. "I need you and Harold," he called. "Right now, if you please." She squinted at him. Then she looked through the gap in the buildings, as if she could somehow see Luke and Abby from where she stood. She couldn't, but she set down her broom anyway. "Harold!" they heard her call, loud enough to carry half a block. "Get your good boots on!" Abby made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a cry. Something that lived precisely between those 2 things, and was more honest than either. Luke looked at her. "You sure?" he asked, quiet enough that only she could hear. She straightened, both hands on her belly, chin up, eyes forward. "Ask me that again," she said, "and I'll walk out of here myself and figure out another way." He nodded. "Fair enough," he said. And so they were married. 40 minutes later, in a small study that smelled of old books and lamp oil, with Martha Greer weeping freely into a handkerchief, and Harold standing stiff and proud beside her, and a summer thunderhead building purple and gold on the western horizon, Abigail Reynolds became Abigail Harper. She did not weep. She stood straight and spoke her words clear, and looked Reverend Calkins in the eye the entire time. When it came to the ring, there was no ring. Neither of them had thought of it. Luke pulled a strip of leather from his saddlebag, braided it quickly with 3 passes of his fingers, and held it out. She looked down at it, then up at him. "It'll do for today," he said. "It'll do," she agreed, and held out her hand. He tied it carefully around her finger. His hands didn't shake. When they walked out of the Reverend's office and into the heavy afternoon air, married and strange and new to each other, Luke went to where Dust was tied and untied him, and stood there a moment, reins in hand, not quite looking at her. "The house needs cleaning," he said. "Fair warning." "I've cleaned worse," Abby said. "Probably," he agreed. They stood there in the enormous summer afternoon. Somewhere behind them, Gerald Wilton was in a room somewhere making plans. Somewhere to the northeast, a small house sat waiting on dry grass, with a well that didn't run dry, even in August. And somewhere between where they stood and where they were going, something was beginning. Not a love story yet, not exactly, but the first careful, tentative condition of one. Luke Harper had ridden into Willow Creek that morning looking for nothing. He rode out with a wife, and the whole wide Montana sky pressed down on both of them, gold and merciless and full of light. The ride to Luke's homestead took the better part of an hour, and they spent most of it in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that settles between two people who've already said more than they planned to, and need a moment to catch up with themselves. Abby sat behind him on Dust, one arm loosely around his waist because there was nothing else to hold on to, and she kept her eyes on the road ahead and said nothing. And Luke said nothing, and the hot wind came off the plains and pushed at them both like it had somewhere to be. She felt the baby move once, hard, a foot or an elbow against her ribs, and she pressed her hand there without thinking, and Luke must have felt the slight shift of her weight because he said, without turning, "You all right back there?" "Fine," she said. "He moves a lot." "He?" "I don't know for certain. I just—" She paused. "I've been saying he." "What name?" She was quiet a moment. "I had a name picked. With Daniel." She stopped again. Luke didn't push it. He let the silence come back and held it there for her, and she was grateful for that in a way she couldn't have explained. When they came up the rise and the homestead came into view, Abby looked at it without saying anything. The house was small, single-story, made of weathered timber that had gone gray over the years. The barn beside it leaned slightly to the left, not dangerously, but noticeably, like a man favoring a bad hip. The yard was dry, and the fence needed mending on the south side, and there was a rusted plow sitting off to the side of the barn that looked like it hadn't moved in 2 seasons. She didn't say anything about any of it. Luke climbed down from Dust and held up a hand to help her down. She took it without comment, stepped carefully to the ground, and stood there, looking at the place that was, as of 40 minutes ago, legally her home. "I told you it wasn't much," Luke said. "You told me it was sound," Abby said. "Is it sound?" "Roof holds, floor's solid, well's good." "Then it's enough," she said, and walked toward the door. He watched her push it open and go inside, and he stood there in the late afternoon heat, with Dust's reins in his hand, and the faint sound of her moving around inside. A drawer pulled, a window pushed, footsteps across the plank floor, and he thought that a house sounded entirely different when there was more than one person in it. He hadn't known he'd forgotten that until just now. He put Dust in the barn and came back inside to find Abby standing in the middle of the main room, hands on her hips, turning slowly in a circle. She had already identified 3 things that needed immediate attention. He could tell by the expression on her face. But she was being tactful about it. "There's a bedroom," he said. "Through there. It's yours." She turned. "Where will you sleep?" "Out here's fine. I've slept in worse." "Luke," she said it the way a woman says a name when she's drawing a line. "I'm not going to put you out of your own bed." "You're not putting me out. I'm choosing." "That's a fine distinction." "It's the only one I've got," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said, finally. "For now." She said it like it wasn't final, like she was reserving the right to revisit the argument. And he appreciated that honesty, even if it complicated things. He made supper, beans and salt pork and cornbread, plain as plain, and they ate at the small table by the window with the door open to let the evening air through. And somewhere along the way, they started talking. Not about anything important at first. She asked him how long he'd had the land. 7 years, he told her. He'd come from Nebraska, he said, after the war took what it took. She didn't ask what the war had taken. She understood by the shape of the silence around the words. She told him she'd grown up in Ohio. Her father had been a school teacher. She had 2 sisters, both married, both east of the Mississippi, and too far away to matter right now. "Do they know?" Luke asked. "About your situation?" "I wrote to Clara in April," she said. "She wrote back in May. Said she was sorry. Said she hoped things would improve." She pressed her mouth flat. She didn't offer to come. "Some people can't," Luke said, without judgment. "Some people won't," Abby said, with a great deal of it. He refilled her water glass without being asked. She noticed that. After supper, when the light had gone gold and long through the window, she said, "Tell me about Gerald Wilton. What do you know about him?" Luke set down his cup. "What makes you think I know anything?" "You stepped in today without knowing me. That means you already knew something about them." She looked at him steadily. "What is it?" He was quiet for a moment, turning the cup in his hands. "Gerald Wilton's been buying up land in this county for 3 years, he said. Bottomland, mostly. Creek-adjacent parcels. There's talk he's working with someone in Helena, some land commissioner, to reclassify certain titles, make some claims disappear on paper." Abby went very still. "My land is creek-adjacent." "Yes," he said, "it is." "You think this was never about me," she said slowly. "You think this was always about the land." "I think using you was the simplest route to the land," Luke said. "But that doesn't make what they did to you any less deliberate." She sat with that. The color in her face changed, not to hurt, but to something harder and more useful than hurt. "He played the grieving family," she said, "the concerned relation. He played it in front of witnesses, in front of the town." "Yes, so that when he takes it to a judge, he looks reasonable." Her jaw tightened. "And I look like the unstable widow who refused a fair offer." "That's my read on it," Luke said. "Then it's not Monday I need to worry about," she said. "It's what he does before Monday." And that was when the knock came. 3 sharp raps on the door, hard and deliberate. Luke was on his feet before the third one landed, and Abby's hands went to the table edge and gripped it. He crossed the room and opened the door. It wasn't Gerald Wilton. It was Thomas. He stood on the porch alone in the early dark, hat in hand, which was either manners or performance. With Thomas Wilton, Luke had already decided, everything was performance. "Harper," he said. Then his eyes moved past Luke to Abby at the table, and his expression shifted, recalculating. "I heard you 2 got married." "News travels," Luke said. "It does in Willow Creek." Thomas put the hat back on his head. "I wanted to come and say congratulations, personally." "You've said it," Luke said. "Good night." He started to close the door. "There's a letter," Thomas said. Luke stopped. Thomas reached into his coat and produced an envelope. Cream-colored, thick stock. The kind that meant money, or law, or both. He held it out. "From a land office in Helena. Addressed to Abigail Reynolds." His smile was thin. "Guess it's Abigail Harper now." Funny timing. Luke took the envelope without touching Thomas's hand. He looked at it. The seal on the back was official. Montana Territory Land Commission, printed in black ink. "When did this arrive?" Luke asked. "This afternoon," Thomas said. "Came to our address since Abby ain't HA1 in town." He spread his hands wide. "We're just being neighborly, bringing it out." "You're being something," Luke said. Thomas's smile held. "You should read it," he said, "before Monday." He tipped his hat at Luke, pointedly not at Abby, and turned and walked back toward the road, where a horse stood waiting in the dark. Luke closed the door. He turned around. Abby was already on her feet, hand out. He gave her the envelope. She broke the seal carefully, unfolded the paper, and G-Che it. Luke watched her face. He G-Che it go through 3 or 4 different expressions in the space of about 10 seconds, and then settle into something very flat and very controlled. "What does it say?" he asked. "It says," she said, voice carefully level, "that the title on Daniel's land, my land, was filed improperly in 1871, that the original survey was contested, and that pending review by the Territorial Land Commission, the claim is considered," she paused, "in abeyance." "In abeyance," Luke repeated. "It means frozen," she said. "It means nobody can act on it, buy it, sell it, live on it legally, until the commission rules." She set the letter on the table. "Which could take 6 months, or a year, or longer if someone's greased the right wheels." "Which puts you exactly nowhere for the next year," Luke said. "Which puts me exactly in the position where I need someone to provide for me," she said. "Legally. Which means I need a husband with means." "And if your husband doesn't have means?" "Then the commission may determine that I'm unable to maintain the claim even pending review, and recommend it be—" She stopped. "Absorbed." "Into whose holding?" She looked at him. "Guess." The silence in the room had a new quality to it. Not just quiet, but charged, the way air charges before lightning. "He filed this before today," Luke said. "This wasn't a response to our marriage. This was already in motion." "The auction was a backup," Abby said. "If he could get me married to someone of his choosing, someone who'd sign over quietly, that was cleaner. But if that didn't work," she gestured at the letter, "he already had this running. Either way, I lose the land." "Unless—" "Unless what?" "Unless your husband has documented income and a stable holding and can demonstrate in front of that commission that you're not a ward of charity, but a woman with legal protector and independent means." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's a lot to ask," she said quietly, "of a man I've known 6 hours." "7, Luke said. "We've known each other 7 hours. She didn't laugh. But her eyes changed, just slightly. The same shift he'd seen twice before today, the door with the latch giving. "What income do you have?" she asked. Direct, practical. He liked that about her already, that she didn't circle things. "I've got cattle, 30 head, sold come fall. I've got a grain contract with the Jensen mill that pays quarterly. I've got 7 acres under wheat right now that'll yield enough to—" "Is it enough?" she interrupted. "To show the commission?" He thought about it honestly. "It's enough to show I'm not a charity case," he said. "Whether it's enough to satisfy them depends on what Gerald Wilton has already told them to look for." She sat back down slowly, one hand moving to her back. He noticed, without commenting, that she'd been standing for too long, and that the baby's weight was pulling at her spine. "Sit," he said, and pulled out the other chair. She sat without arguing. Small progress. "There's something else," she said. "In the letter." She picked it up again and found the line. "It says the survey dispute originates with a claim filed in 1869, before Daniel filed his. A prior claim." She looked up. "I've never heard of any prior claim." "Who filed it?" She turned the paper over, looking for more. "It doesn't say, just references a filing number." She set it down. "Someone put in a prior claim on that land in 1869 and then did nothing with it until now. Just let it sit." She spread her hands. "Or someone created a filing in 1869 recently and backdated it." Luke looked at her. "You know what that is?" "Fraud," she said, without hesitation. "That's fraud." "That's also very hard to prove." "I know." She pressed her fingers to her temples. "I know it is. But it's there. And if we can find the original filing—" "We'd need someone in Helena who knows the Land Commission records," Luke said. "Do you know anyone?" "I know a man who might," he said. "Emmett Cole. He was a county recorder before he retired. Lives up near Bozeman now. He knows the old filing systems better than anyone. Can you reach him?" "I can try," Luke said. "Telegraph, first thing tomorrow." She nodded. Then she was quiet for a moment, and the quiet was different from the ones before. This one had weight to it, had the particular density of someone carrying something they've been carrying too long in silence. "Luke," she said. "Yeah?" "Why did Daniel's brother wait 4 months?" She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the letter. "He knew Daniel was dead. He knew I was alone. He waited 4 months before he moved on this." She paused. "That's not impatience. That's patience. Careful, planned patience." Luke thought about it. What changed 4 months after Daniel died? She looked up slowly, and the answer was already in her face before she said it. "The baby," she said. "He waited until I was visibly pregnant." "A pregnant widow with no income and no family nearby," Luke said. "Is a much easier target than just a widow," she finished. Her voice was steady, but her hands had come together on the table in front of her, and her fingers were white. "He didn't just plan this. He waited for the right moment. He watched me." The word "watched" landed in the room like something physical. "He'll have someone watching this place tonight," Luke said. "Probably." She looked at the door. "Which means by morning, half the county'll know about this letter," he said. "Gerald'll want it out there. Want people to think the claim is contested, that I married into a losing hand. Undermine the marriage before it does him any damage." "So we need to move first," Abby said. "We need to move first," Luke agreed. She straightened in the chair, both hands flat on the table now, steady and deliberate. "Then this is what we do," she said. "Tomorrow morning, you send that telegraph to Emmett Cole. I need to write down everything I know about the land, the boundaries, the survey marks Daniel described, the year he originally filed, every payment we made against the claim. Everything. I need it on paper, in detail, in my own hand, signed and dated. As evidence." "As a record," she said. "Evidence comes later, if we're lucky. Right now, I just need a record that says, I was here, I was legal, and I was paying attention." She looked at him. "Is there paper in this house?" "Writing desk in the bedroom, left drawer." She stood up. He stood up with her, automatic, without thinking about it. She noticed, and something moved across her face. Not quite softness, but the possibility of it. "I'm all right," she said. "I know you are," he said. "That wasn't concern. That's just—" He stopped. "Manners." "Your manners are going to confuse me," she said, and she went to the bedroom and came back a minute later with paper and a pencil. And she sat back down at the table and began to write. Luke stood for a moment, watching her bent over the paper in the lamplight, writing in quick, sure strokes. And he thought again about how a house sounds different with 2 people in it. He thought about the letter on the table, and Gerald Wilton's careful patience, and the prior claim filed in 1869 by a name nobody had been shown yet. And he thought about Emmett Cole, up near Bozeman, and whether a retired county recorder still owed him a favor from 8 years back. He thought about 6 weeks, maybe 7. He went to the window and looked out into the dark. The summer stars were out in full, blanketing everything, the Milky Way spreading across the sky like spilled grain. Far down the road, just at the edge of his vision, he thought he saw a horse standing still. Just standing, too still for an animal grazing, the particular stillness of a horse whose rider is watching something. He watched back for a long moment. Then he turned from the window and picked up the letter from the table and folded it and put it in his breast pocket. And he got the spare blanket from the chest by the wall and spread it on the floor near the door, because there was no sense in being caught with nothing if Thomas Wilton or someone like him came back before morning. "Luke," Abby said, without looking up from her writing. "Yeah?" "Thank you," she said. "Again." She kept writing. "I'll stop saying it once I figure out a better way to repay it." "You don't owe me anything." "I know I don't," she said, and there was something very particular in how she said it. Not dismissing the thanks, but refusing the debt, which was different and said something about who she was. He lay down on the blanket by the door and stared at the ceiling and listened to the scratch of pencil on paper. And somewhere outside, the sound of a nighthawk cutting through the hot dark. Gerald Wilton had been patient for 4 months. Luke Harper figured they had until Monday, which meant about 3 days to be smarter than a patient man. 3 days to find a backdated fraud in a territory land office 300 miles away. 3 days to turn a marriage that was 7 hours old into something solid enough to stand up in front of a judge. He'd faced worse odds. He thought about that for a moment and couldn't actually remember when. But it seemed like the right thing to think. Across the room, Abby Reynolds, Abby Harper, kept writing, steady and relentless, and didn't stop until the lamp burned low. Luke was up before sunrise. He had the telegram written out and folded in his shirt pocket before Abby stirred, and he had coffee on the stove and the horses watered by the time she came out of the bedroom, with her hair still down and her eyes sharp, in the way of someone who hadn't slept much, but had thought a great deal instead. She looked at the coffee, then at him. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I slept some." "You slept none," she said. "There's a difference between a man who slept some and a man who didn't sleep, and the difference is in the eyes." He handed her the coffee. "I need to ride into town for the telegraph office. It opens at 7. I want to be first through the door." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "I'm coming with you." "You should rest, Luke." The same tone as last night, the line-drawing tone. He didn't argue. "We leave in 20 minutes, he said. She was ready in 15. They rode into Willow Creek in the early morning before the heat got serious, before most of the town was awake and moving. The telegraph office sat beside the post office on the main street, and the clerk, a young man named Avery with ink-stained fingers and the hollow eyes of someone who'd worked the night shift, looked up when Luke pushed through the door. "Morning," Luke said. "I need this sent to Bozeman. Emmett Cole, Prospect Road, North End. It's urgent." Avery took the paper and read it, and whatever personal opinions he had about the message, he kept them behind his eyes. He counted the words. 40 cents, he said. Luke paid. "How fast?" "If the line's clear, he'll have it by noon." "And a reply?" "Depends on whether he's home and whether he answers." Avery set the message in his outgoing tray. "Could be this afternoon. Could be tomorrow." "Make it clear it's urgent," Luke said. "I already wrote urgent in the header." "Write it twice," Luke said. Avery looked at him. Then he picked up the paper and wrote it twice. They came out of the telegraph office into a morning that was already warm and tightening with the particular tension of a day that intended to be difficult. Abby stood on the boardwalk beside him, looking down the street, and Luke followed her gaze. Gerald Wilton's wagon was parked in front of the land office. Not the judge's office, not the sheriff, the land office. "He's not waiting until Monday," Abby said. "No," Luke said, "he's not." She turned to him. "I need to go in there." "Abby, I need to go in there, and I need to know what he's filing, and I need to do it before he leaves," she said. "Luke, if he submits something this morning, it goes into official record before we've had a single chance to respond. Everything I wrote last night won't matter if his version gets there first." She was right. He knew she was right. "Okay," he said, "but you let me walk in first." "Why?" "Because Gerald Wilton is going to look at you and see a pregnant widow he's already decided has lost," Luke said. "I want him to look at me first. I want to watch his face when he realizes last night didn't slow us down." Something moved through her eyes. Not soft exactly, but adjacent. "All right," she said. "You go first." The land office smelled of paper and dust and warm wood, and Gerald Wilton was standing at the counter with his back to the door when Luke walked in. The clerk, a thin, nervous man named Patterson, who wore his collar too tight, was sorting through a stack of documents with the particular energy of someone who'd been told to hurry. Gerald turned at the sound of the door. His face did exactly what Luke had hoped it would. It registered Luke, recalculated, registered Abby stepping in behind him, and went very still in the way faces go still when a plan runs into something it didn't account for. "Harper," he said. "Gerald," Luke said. He looked at the papers on the counter. "Early morning for a land transaction." "I have every right." "Nobody said you didn't." Luke put both hands flat on the counter beside the papers and looked at Patterson. "What's being filed?" Patterson looked at Gerald. Gerald said nothing. Patterson looked back at Luke and swallowed. "A petition," he said, "regarding the Reynolds claim, requesting the commission expedite their review given the disputed survey." "On behalf of who?" Luke asked. "On behalf of the Wilton family as adjacent claim holders," Patterson said, quieter now. "Adjacent claim holders," Abby said from behind Luke. She stepped up beside him. "Show me the adjacent claim." Gerald's jaw tightened. "You don't have standing to—" "I'm the primary holder of the disputed title," Abby said. "My name is on that claim. I have full standing to review any petition that references it. Mr. Patterson." She looked at the clerk directly. "That's the law. You know that." Patterson knew it. He pulled a thin folder from beneath the stack and pushed it across the counter. Abby opened it. She read it standing, quickly, her eyes moving fast down the page. Luke watched her face the same way he'd watched it last night, tracking the small shifts and tells that told him what the words were doing to her before she said anything out loud. And then her face stopped moving. "This is dated April," she said. "Yes," Gerald said. "April 14th. She looked up at him. "Daniel died March 31st. "That's correct." "You filed this petition 2 weeks after my husband died," she said. "Before he was cold in the ground." "The law doesn't have a mourning period, Mrs. Harper," she said, hard. "My name is Abby Harper. And the law may not have a mourning period, but you came to my house in April and sat at my table and told me you were there to make sure Daniel's wishes were honored." Her voice didn't rise, but it cut. "You sat at my table, Gerald. You held your hat in your hands. You told me you wanted to help." The silence in the small office was total. Patterson had stopped shuffling papers entirely. "You were already filing this," she said, "while you were sitting at my table." Gerald said nothing. "That's not a land dispute," she said. "That's a lie. Dressed up in paperwork and filed with a government office, but a lie." "Mrs. Harper," Patterson started. "Don't call her that," Luke said, and there was something in the way he said it that made Patterson close his mouth. Luke picked up the petition from the counter and read it himself, fast and specific, and in the third paragraph he found what he was looking for. "Prior claim," he said, "filed 1869. Claim number T-1874-229. He looked up at Gerald. "Who filed it?" "That's in the territorial record. I'm asking you," Luke said. "Who filed that prior claim?" Gerald picked up his hat from the counter. A deliberate motion. A closing motion. "This will all be sorted by the commission," he said. "Monday, as agreed." "We'll be there," Luke said. "I certainly hope so." Gerald put his hat on and walked to the door, and he stopped with his hand on the frame without turning around. "I'd hate for the commission to decide in absentia." He left. Luke looked at Patterson. The clerk was staring at the door where Gerald had been standing. "Patterson," Luke said. The man looked at him. "I need a copy of everything that was just filed, and I need the original filing number for claim T-1874-229. "I can't just—" "You can make copies," Luke said. "That's public record once it's filed. That's the law too, and you also know that." Patterson pressed his mouth together. Then he reached under the counter for his copy ledger. "Give me an hour," he said. "We'll wait," Luke said. They sat on the bench outside the land office in the climbing morning heat, side by side, and Abby was quiet in a way that Luke had already learned meant she was thinking hard and fast and didn't want to be interrupted. He didn't interrupt her. He watched the street. 2 horses at the hitching post down by the saloon. A woman hanging wash from an upper window of the boarding house. The ordinary working machinery of a town that didn't know, or didn't care, what was happening in the land office behind them. After about 10 minutes, Abby said, "He's been planning this since before Daniel died." "What makes you say that?" "Because you don't file a land commission petition 2 weeks after a man dies, unless you wrote it before he died," she said. "You'd need time to prepare the documents, contact the commission, establish the basis for the dispute. That takes weeks, maybe months." She paused. "Gerald started this while Daniel was still alive." Luke turned that over. "Did Daniel know?" "I don't know." Her voice went quiet on that. "I don't know if Daniel knew and didn't tell me to protect me, or if he didn't know at all." She pressed her lips together. "Either way, he died without being able to fight it, and Gerald knew he would." "You think he knew Daniel was sick?" "I think," she said carefully, "that Gerald Wilton is a man who makes plans and waits. And I think he was waiting for something that made Daniel vulnerable. And I think the fever gave him his window." She stopped. "I can't prove that. I know I can't prove it. But I know it." Luke said nothing for a moment. Then, "The prior claim, T-1874-229, that's what everything hinges on. If the prior claim is fraudulent, then the petition collapses," Luke said. "Without the prior claim, Gerald's just a man trying to take his dead brother's wife's land, which is bad-looking, but not legally actionable. But with the prior claim, he's got standing. The commission has to look at it." She was quiet again. Then, "Emmett Cole, how well do you know him?" "Well enough," Luke said. "He filed my own claim paperwork in 1867, and I did him a favor in 71 that I've never called in." "What kind of favor?" "The kind that doesn't need a name," Luke said. "But he owes me, and he knows the territorial filing system better than anybody alive." "If anyone can find a backdated fraud—" "It's him," Luke said. They sat with that, and the morning got hotter around them, and Patterson took the full hour and then a little longer. But when he came out, he gave Luke a careful stack of papers and didn't make eye contact with either of them. And Luke understood that Patterson was a man caught between two forces and had chosen to be technically correct rather than take a side, which was about as much as you could expect from a man in his position.
Luke folded the papers into his saddlebag, and they were back on Dust, heading for the homestead, when Abby said,
"There was a name on the back of that commission letter, a signature, authorizing the review." "Commissioner Hale," Luke said. He'd caught it too. "Do you know him?" "I know of him," Luke said. "He's been the Territorial Land Commissioner for about 4 years, appointed by the governor." He paused. "There have been rumors." "About Hale?" "About the way some claims get resolved in his district," Luke said carefully. "Claims that should take 2 years get resolved in 3 months. Claims that should be simple drag on until the holder gives up." "Depending on who benefits from the resolution," Abby said. "That's the rumor." She let that sit for a moment. "Gerald Wilton has a man inside the commission." "That would be my guess," Luke said. "Which means even if we find the fraud in the filing, whoever we report it to might be the person who authorized it," Abby finished. Her voice was flat with the weight of it. Luke tightened his jaw. He'd been turning this piece over since last night, since he'd seen Commissioner Hale's signature, and he hadn't found the clean answer yet. You couldn't fight a corrupt official with another official if you didn't know who to trust. You needed someone above Hale, someone who didn't owe Hale anything. "A federal land examiner," he said. She turned her head. "What?" "The Territorial Commission answers to the Federal Land Office," he said. "If we can document the fraud, real documentation, dated and signed and witnessed, and get it to a federal examiner rather than the Territorial Commission, it bypasses Hale entirely." "How long does that take?" "Weeks," he said. "Months, maybe. But it's outside Hale's reach." "We don't have weeks," she said. "We have until Monday."
"Monday's one hearing," Luke said. "We don't have to win everything Monday. We just have to survive Monday without losing the claim. If we can get a federal inquiry opened, even just pending, the commission can't rule against you while a federal review is active." She was quiet for a full minute, working through it. "That's a very thin thread." "It is," he agreed. "But it's a thread." "Yes." She nodded once, the decisive nod he was beginning to recognize. "Then we pull on it," she said. "What do we need for a federal inquiry?" "Evidence of fraud or official misconduct," he said. "Documented, signed, filed with the Federal Land Office in Washington, or with a federal circuit examiner if there's one in the territory." "Is there one?" "There was one posted to Helena 2 years ago," Luke said. "Man named Aldridge. I don't know if he's still there." "Then we need to know by tonight," Abby said. They were still half a mile from the homestead when they saw the smoke. Not a cooking fire, not a chimney. Black and thick and rolling from somewhere beyond the rise, and Luke felt the bottom drop out of his stomach before his mind had fully processed what it meant. He kicked Dust hard. They came over the rise, and Luke pulled up sharp, and the word that came out of him wasn't fit for company, but Abby was already climbing down before he'd finished saying it, and he caught her arm. "Wait!" "That's the wheat field," she said, and her voice had gone strange. Not panicked. Worse than panicked. The flat voice of someone who sees the worst thing and recognizes it. "I know," he said. "Wait." He looked at the fire. 7 acres of dry summer wheat going up in the kind of blaze that took hold fast and burned clean and purposeful, moving against the wind rather than with it, which meant it hadn't started from a cinder or a lightning strike.
It had started from more than one point. It was set, Abby said, because she was looking at the same thing he was. Yes, he said. He set the wheat on fire. She said it like she needed to hear herself say it out loud to fully believe it. He burned your crop. Luke was already moving, shouting for water, pulling the emergency bucket line from the side of the barn. And for the next 2 hours, there was nothing but heat and smoke, and the desperate physical work of trying to hold the fire to the field and keep it from jumping to the barn and the house. 3 neighbors showed up, the Greer farmhands, a man from the Jensen place, and they worked without talking, without asking questions, throwing water and beating the edges with wet burlap, until finally the fire exhausted itself on the far boundary of the field and stopped. 7 acres. Gone. Luke stood at the edge of the black and looked at it. His shirt was soaked through, and his hands were raw, and there was ash in his throat. Beside him, Abby stood with a wet cloth still in her hands, breathing hard, her face streaked with smoke. And she was looking at the field with those gray-green eyes, and she wasn't crying, and she wasn't talking. And that silence was the loudest thing Luke had ever heard. This was his message, she said finally. Yeah, Luke said. He burned your grain contract, she said. Your income. The thing you were going to show the commission. And there it was, the thing that had been sitting underneath the fire like a coal under ash. Gerald Wilton hadn't just wanted to hurt them. He'd wanted to take away the financial standing Luke had spent the night mentally calculating. The wheat yield, the quarterly contract, the documented income. All of it, in a morning. Without it, Luke's case before the commission looked a great deal thinner. He knew about the commission argument, Luke said. He knew we'd try to use my income as standing. Or he guessed. Abby turned to look at him. Either way, he knew this would hurt us most. One of the Jensen hands, a young man named Cal, 17 or 18 with sun-dark arms, was still standing nearby, hat in hand, looking at the field. Mr. Harper, he said, I saw a rider, before I saw the smoke, coming off your east property line. Luke went still. What did he look like? Couldn't say for certain, Cal hesitated. But the horse was a bay, with a white sock on the left foreleg. Luke looked at Abby. Abby looked back at him. Thomas Wilton rides a bay, she said. White sock, left foreleg. Cal looked between them. I could say that, he said carefully, if someone asked me. Would you? Luke asked. The boy thought about it for a moment, with the particular seriousness of someone who understands exactly what they're committing to. My daddy lost his claim 2 years ago, he said. Wilton land now. He put his hat back on. Yeah, I'd say it. Luke reached out and shook the boy's hand. I'll need that in writing, he said, signed. Tonight, if you want, Cal said. The other hands drifted back toward their own properties, and Luke and Abby were left alone at the edge of the burned field, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Abby said, very quietly, He made a mistake. Luke looked at her. He panicked, she said. He burned the field because he knew the commission argument was stronger than he expected. That means he's worried. She turned to face Luke fully. Gerald Wilton has been patient and careful for 4 months, and this morning he did something impulsive and destructive that left a witness. She met his eyes. He's not winning as easily as he planned. Luke thought about that. She wasn't wrong. A patient man didn't burn fields. A patient man let the paperwork do the work. A man who burned fields was a man who felt the ground moving under him. The wheat's gone, Luke said. The wheat's gone, she agreed. But Cal Jensen just became a witness to arson, and arson is a federal crime. She paused. And federal crimes, she said slowly, are investigated by federal examiners. Luke looked at her for a long moment. You want to use the arson, he said. I want to use the arson, she said, to get Aldridge to open a federal inquiry. She pressed her hand to her back, automatically, the baby's weight pulling. Gerald Wilton wanted to take away our strongest piece, but what he actually did was hand us a door into the federal office. Luke shook his head. Not dismissal, something closer to disbelief. You figured that out standing next to a burning field. I figured that out because a burning field focuses the mind considerably, she said. He looked at the black stretch of ruined wheat, and then he looked at her, and something in him shifted. Not the quiet, cautious shift of the door with the latch giving, but something faster and more definitive, like a bolt sliding home. I need to send another telegraph, he said. 2, she said. 1 to Emmett Cole, updating him on the arson. 1 to Aldridge's office in Helena. And a written statement from Cal Jensen, he said. Tonight, she said, before Thomas Wilton hears the boy talked. They moved at the same time, both turning back toward the house, and they were walking fast with purpose, and for a moment, just a moment, their hands were almost touching. Close enough that Luke could have closed the distance without trying. He didn't. But he was aware of it in a way he hadn't been an hour ago. And he thought she was too, though neither of them said so. And the summer afternoon pressed down around them, enormous and unforgiving and full of ash and something else. Something that hadn't been there that morning. They had one day before Monday. Gerald Wilton had shown his hand. And for the first time since she'd stood in that crowd behind the general store with her hands pressed flat against her belly, Abby Harper looked like a woman who wasn't just surviving. She looked like a woman who was going to win.
Lưu ý, viết 2.600 đến 3.000 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyển tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột. Không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ. Giọng văn giàu cảm xúc, chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 4 đạt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lỗi A, mi, kể theo ngôi thứ 3, tăng độ kịch tính, không viết lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau.
Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn, không nhảy sang mục document. Mỗi 2 đến 3 phút cần có mini climax và đạt 10 đến 15 mini climax mỗi phần. Cứ 10 đến 12 phút có một twist lớn, sâu sắc. Đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn. Tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu kịch tính, thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nhé. Show more. 10 giờ 42 phút. Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation with dramatic pacing and emotional depth. Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation with dramatic pacing and emotional depth. Cal Jensen came to the homestead that evening with his hat in his hands and his testimony already written out on a piece of paper folded twice, in the careful block letters of a young man who'd learned to write from a mother who believed in it. He sat at Luke's table and signed his name at the bottom without hesitating. And when Luke asked him if he understood what he was signing, Cal looked him straight in the eye and said, "I know exactly what I'm signing, Mr. Harper. I've been waiting 2 years for a reason to sign something like it." Luke witnessed it. Abby witnessed it. And then Luke rolled the statement into a tight cylinder and tied it with a strip of leather and put it in the saddlebag with everything else. Patterson's copies, the commission letter, Abby's handwritten record of every payment and transaction and boundary marker she could remember.
and that saddlebag had become the most important object on the property, which was why Luke moved it from the saddle to inside the house, and from inside the house to under the floorboard beneath the bedroom window before he went to sleep that night. The reply from Emmett Cole came the next morning. Luke was at the telegraph office at 7 again, and Avery handed him the message with the expression of a man who'd read it and found it interesting, but knew better than to say so. Luke read it on the street outside. T-1874-229, filed. Territorial Office, September 1869. Undername Robert D. Aldous. Aldous died August 1869. Filing postdated. Original entry, Clerk H. Briggs. Briggs worked Land Commission until 1871. Currently employed, private surveying firm Helena. Firm owned by Garrett Wilton. Luke read it twice. Then he folded it very carefully and walked back to where Abby was waiting outside the general store. He handed it to her without a word. She read it. He watched her face. Garrett Wilton, she said. Gerald's father, Luke said. The prior claim was filed by a dead man, she said, a month after he died. She looked up. And the clerk who filed it worked for Gerald's father. And now works for a company owned by Gerald's father, Luke said. Or did, until 1871. They created the prior claim, she said, not a question. They invented a prior claimant, filed it under his name after he was dead so he couldn't contradict it, buried it in the territorial records for 5 years, and then, when they needed it, they pulled it out. That's fraud, Luke said. Federal land fraud. That's not a land dispute in front of Judge Carraway. That's a federal crime. Abby's hands were steady, but her breathing had quickened. Emmett Cole documented this? He's sending the full written report by courier, Luke said, addressed to me. Should arrive Monday morning. Monday morning, she repeated. The hearing is Monday afternoon. I know. That's very thin, she said. It's thin, he agreed. But Emmett Cole's written report, plus Cal Jensen's arson statement, plus your land records, all of it together, that's enough to file for a federal inquiry. And if we can get that filing to Aldridge before the hearing... Can you reach Aldridge? She asked.
Did the telegraph get through? I sent it yesterday afternoon, he said. No reply yet. She pressed her lips together. Luke, if Aldridge doesn't respond by Sunday, then we walk into that hearing Monday with what we have, and we make it hold, he said. She looked at him steadily. And if it doesn't hold? He held her gaze. Then we appeal to the federal level anyway, and we fight it from there. He paused. I'm not letting them take your land, Abby. I want to be clear about that. Something moved through her face, deep and complicated, the kind of thing a person feels when they've been carrying something alone for so long that having someone else put their hands on it, even briefly, causes an ache they didn't know was there. You barely know me, she said, for the 3rd time in 2 days. But it came out differently this time. Not wary, almost wondering. I know you well enough, he said. That's been established. She looked away down the street and then back at him.
Emmett Cole, she said. You said you did him a favor in 71 that you'd never called in. Yes. What was it? He was quiet for a moment. His son got into trouble, he said. The kind of trouble that follows a young man around if it goes on record. I happened to be in a position to make sure it didn't go on record. She studied him. You protected his family. I did what was right, he said. Same thing. She was quiet for a moment, and he could feel her turning something over. Why haven't you called it in before now? She asked. 7 years. You must have needed something in 7 years. I managed, he said. Most people can't hold a favor that long without using it. Most people use favors for themselves, Luke said. I was waiting for something that mattered. The silence that followed that was different from all the other silences. It was the kind that a person could fall into and not immediately want to climb out of.
Abby looked at him and then looked away, and the color that came into her face had nothing to do with the heat. "We should get back," she said. "We should," he agreed. Neither of them moved for a full 3 seconds. Then they did. They were halfway back to the homestead, coming over the same rise where they'd seen the fire, when they saw the wagon in the yard. Not the Wilton wagon. This one was newer, lacquered black, with a territorial government seal on the side panel. 2 horses tied at the post. And on the porch, standing with his back straight and his hat in his hands, a man Luke had never seen before. Mid-50s, silver-haired, with a kind of upright posture that came from either military service or a lifetime of believing people were watching him. Abby gripped Luke's arm. "Is that—" "I don't know," Luke said. But he had a feeling. He urged Dust forward. The man turned as they rode up. He had a lined face and careful eyes that moved from Luke to Abby and back with the professional speed of a man accustomed to reading situations quickly. "Luke Harper?" he said. "That's right," Luke said, climbing down. "James Aldridge," the man said. "Federal Land Examiner, Montana Territory." He held out a hand, and Luke shook it. "Your telegraph found me at a fortunate moment. I was already in the county on another matter." His eyes moved to Abby. "Mrs. Harper?" "Yes," Abby said, and her voice was controlled, but Luke could feel the effort it cost her. She climbed down without help. "Thank you for coming." "I haven't committed to anything yet," Aldridge said carefully. "I came to hear what you have." He looked from one to the other. "You'd better show me what you've got." They went inside. Luke pulled the saddlebag from under the floorboard and spread everything on the table. Patterson's copies, the commission letter, Abby's land record, Cal Jensen's arson statement. Aldridge stood over it with his hands behind his back and read carefully and without comment for a long time. And the only sound in the house was paper and the hot wind through the screen door. He read Cal Jensen's statement twice. He read the commission letter 3 times. Then he looked up. "This Emmett Cole," he said. "You trust him?" "With my life," Luke said. "His written report is coming by courier Monday morning?" "That's what he telegraphed," Luke said. Aldridge looked at the table again. "The filing number on the prior claim," he said. T-1874-229. I know that sequence. He paused. That numbering format was changed in 1870. It shouldn't have that prefix for a filing dated 1869. The room went very quiet. "Which means," Abby said carefully, "the filing number itself is inconsistent with a genuine 1869 date." "It would suggest the document was created after 1870 and given a false date," Aldridge said. "I'd need to verify that against the original territorial filing ledger. But if the numbering is wrong, then the fraud isn't just in the clerk's testimony," Luke said. "It's in the document itself." Aldridge looked at him steadily. "Mr. Harper, do you understand what you're asking me to do? If I open a federal inquiry on Commissioner Hale's office based on this, and it turns out the evidence doesn't fully support the claim—" "It supports it," Luke said. "I'm telling you the political weight of moving against a sitting territorial commissioner." "I understand the weight," Luke said. "And I'm telling you the evidence is real. The fraud is real." He met Aldridge's eyes without flinching. "And I think you already know that. I think that's why you are already in this county." Aldridge was very still for a moment. Then something in his face shifted. The careful professional mask settled into something more human and more tired. The Reynolds claim isn't the first, he said quietly. There are 4 others in the past 3 years. Same pattern. Survey dispute. Prior claim pulled from the files. Commission review that moves unusually fast. He looked at the table. I've been building a case. Slowly. Carefully. Without enough to take to Washington. He paused. Until now. Abby put both hands flat on the table. You were already investigating Hale. I was building toward it, Aldridge said. But I needed documented fraud on a specific filing. Something concrete, dated, witnessed. He looked at Cal Jensen's statement. A witnessed arson by a Wilton family member the day after a commission petition is filed. That's not a coincidence a federal judge can ignore. He straightened. Mrs. Harper, if I open a formal federal inquiry today, the Monday hearing cannot proceed. The commission is stayed pending federal review. Gerald Wilton cannot act on your claim while that review is open.
Abby's breath went out of her slowly. How long does that protection last?
Until the review concludes, Aldridge said. And given what I suspect we'll find in those Helena files, that could result in criminal charges, which would make any action by the Wilton family against your claim permanently void. The word permanently sat in the middle of the room like a stone dropped into still water, and all 3 of them felt the rings spreading out from it. Open the inquiry, Abby said. Steady, clear, no hesitation. Aldridge nodded. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document, already prepared, Luke realized, which meant Aldridge had come here expecting to move. He set it on the table. I'll need your signed statements, both of you, and the physical copies of everything on this table. They're yours, Luke said. They spent the next hour going through it. Formal statements, signatures, Aldridge's own written notes and a ledger he pulled from his bag. He was methodical and unhurried, the way men were who understood that the thoroughness of the paperwork determined the outcome of the fight, not the passion of the argument. And then, when it was almost done, when Aldridge was organizing the last of the documents, there was a knock at the door. Not 3 sharp raps this time. 1. Heavy. Deliberate. Luke was on his feet before the echo died. He opened the door. Gerald Wilton stood on the porch. Alone this time. No Thomas. No performance. Just a man in his Sunday coat, with a face that had gone past red into something pale and harder. He looked at Luke. Then he looked past Luke into the room, and he saw Aldridge at the table, and he saw the government seal on the leather satchel beside him. And something happened in his face that Luke had never seen on it before. Fear. Gerald, Luke said. Gerald said nothing. His eyes were still fixed on Aldridge, working through the calculations, and Luke could almost see the moment he arrived at the conclusion. The thing he'd built and planned and waited 4 months for, dissolving in front of him in real time. Aldridge looked up from the table. He took in Gerald Wilton with the same professional speed he'd used on everything else. Mr. Wilton, he said, not a question. He already knew who it was. Gerald's jaw worked. I don't... He stopped. Started again. What is this? This is a federal land inquiry, Aldridge said pleasantly. Opened this afternoon under my authority as federal examiner for Montana Territory. He picked up one of the documents and set it down again. A small, precise gesture that said everything about who held the power in the room. The Monday hearing before the Territorial Commission has been stayed pending review. You'll receive official notice by this evening. You can't... Gerald stopped. His hands were at his sides, and they were clenching slowly. And Luke watched them, because hands told more truth than faces. This is irregular. This is... You'd need grounds. I have grounds, Aldridge said. What grounds? Aldridge looked at him for a moment. Then he said, very calmly, "Prior claim T-1874-229, filed under the name of a man who had been dead for a month. A filing number inconsistent with the date of record. A land office clerk who filed that claim and is currently employed by your family's surveying firm." He paused. "And a witnessed account placing your son at this property on the morning of a deliberately set fire." He folded his hands. "Those are my grounds, Mr. Wilton." The silence was absolute. Gerald's face had gone the color of old ash. "Thomas," he said, barely audible. "Thomas did—" "Don't," Abby said. Her voice came from behind Luke, and both men turned. She had come to stand in the middle of the room, both hands at her sides, and she was looking at Gerald Wilton with those clear, gray-green eyes that had never once gone soft on him. "Don't put it on Thomas," she said. "Don't stand in my house and act like your son acted without your knowledge. You planned this from the beginning, before Daniel was even in the ground." Her voice didn't shake. "I know you did, and now Mr. Aldridge knows it. And when this is done, everyone in Willow Creek will know it too." Gerald looked at her, and for a moment something passed through his face that might have been shame. Not remorse, not regret, but the particular shame of a man who has been seen clearly by someone he underestimated. It lasted about 2 seconds. Then it hardened back into something defensive and ugly. "You think this is over?" he said, low, just to her. Luke stepped forward, 1 step, no more than that, but Gerald's eyes snapped to him immediately. "It's over for today," Luke said, "and I think you ought to leave now. You married a woman you don't know, with nothing to—" "I said, leave," Luke said. Something in the room changed, some quality of the air, the silence, the particular stillness of Luke's hands at his sides. And Gerald Wilton took one look at it and made a calculation that was, for once, the right one. He left. They heard his boots on the porch, the creak of the wagon seat, the horse moving out of the yard. And then the sound of it fading and the silence coming back. And Abby let out a single long, slow breath, like she'd been holding it since April. Aldridge stood and closed his satchel. "I'll ride to town and file the stay this afternoon," he said. "By morning it'll be official." He looked at Abby. "Your claim is protected, Mrs. Harper. For now, and if this inquiry proceeds as I expect, permanently." "Thank you," Abby said. And then, after a moment, "How many families?" Aldridge looked at her. "You said there were 4 others," she said. "Same pattern. How many families lost land they shouldn't have lost?" Aldridge was quiet for a moment. "4 confirmed," he said. "Possibly more." Abby nodded slowly. "When this is done," she said, "I want those families to know what happened. I want them to know they were stolen from. Even if the land can't be returned, I want them to know someone found the truth." Aldridge looked at her for a long moment, with the expression of a man revising his earlier assessment of a situation. "I'll do what I can," he said, and the words carried a weight that said he meant them. He left. His wagon rolled out of the yard, and the afternoon pressed back in, hot and still and enormous. And Luke and Abby stood in the middle of the house, and neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Abby sat down. Not collapsed, sat, deliberate, the way a person sits when they've been standing for too long and have finally earned the right to stop. She put both hands on the table and looked at them. Luke sat across from her. He didn't say anything. He understood, by now, the difference between her silences. The thinking kind, the grieving kind, the exhausted kind. This one was all 3 at once, layered on top of each other, and the only thing to do with it was sit with her until it settled.
After a while, she said, "Daniel used to say the land was the only honest thing." Her voice was quiet and even and careful, the way you talk about someone you love after they're gone. He said people could lie and promises could break, but land was what it was. It didn't pretend. She paused. He was so proud of that claim. He worked himself half to death to keep up the payments. She pressed her lips together. He didn't know they were coming for it all along. He knew you'd fight for it, Luke said. She looked up. A man who loves something the way you're describing? He knew what he was leaving it to, Luke said. He knew what you were made of. Her eyes went wet. She didn't look away this time, didn't redirect it or contain it. She let it be there, which Luke had come to understand was its own kind of strength. I miss him, she said simply. I know that's... She stopped. It's not complicated, Luke said. You're allowed to miss him. She nodded once. The tears didn't fall. She pulled them back in the way she pulled everything back, not suppressing it, just choosing when and whether. Luke, she said. Yeah? She looked at him across the table and said, What do you want? Out of this, out of... She gestured at the room, the house, the whole situation. All of this. He thought about it honestly, not the polite answer, not the easy answer. I want to farm land that's worth farming, he said. I want to sit down at the end of a day with someone worth sitting down with. He paused. I want a child in this house before I get much older. Not as a condition, he added quickly. Just the truth of it. She looked at him for a long moment. That's an honest answer. You asked an honest question, he said. She looked down at her hands again, at the braided leather strip on her finger. She turned it once, slowly. After the baby comes, she said. After all this is settled, and the inquiry is done, and I know the land is safe. She stopped. You don't have to say it, Luke said. I want to say it, she said. After all that, she looked up at him. I think I'd like to know what this is, what we are, without the emergency of it. She paused. I think you're worth knowing without the emergency. Luke held her gaze. Something in his chest, some tight-coiled thing that had been wound down for a very long time, loosened by one careful degree. I think the same about you, he said. She nodded, and then she put her hand flat on the table between them, not reaching for his, just placing it there. An offer, open-ended, unhurried. And after a moment, Luke put his hand beside hers, close but not touching. And they sat like that in the late afternoon heat, with the sound of summer coming through the open door and the saddlebag under the floorboard, holding all the evidence they'd built from nothing in 2 days. And neither of them said another word for a long time. Then Abby sat up straight and said, I need to eat something. I haven't eaten since morning, and this baby is going to make his feelings about that known very shortly. Luke stood up. I've got beans, Luke, and cornbread. We are going to have a serious conversation, she said, about the variety of food in this house. That's fair, he said. Starting tomorrow. Starting now, she said, and she was almost smiling. And so was he. And it was evening in Montana, and the inquiry was open, and the claim was protected, and somewhere in Helena, a corrupt commissioner was about to have a very difficult week. And in a small house on dry summer land, 2 people who had married each other as strangers were becoming, slowly and carefully and honestly, something else entirely. The knock came just as Luke set the pot on the stove. Not at the front door this time, the back. 3 sharp raps. He and Abby looked at each other across the room. The almost smiles were gone. Luke went to the back door and opened it. It was Martha Greer. Behind her stood Harold, and behind Harold stood 4 other people from town. The gray-bearded rancher from the crowd, 2 women Luke recognized from church, and the young man he didn't know, who was holding a folded document like it was either precious or dangerous.
Martha looked at him with her strong-handed, decided face and said, "We heard Aldridge was here." She looked past Luke to Abby. "We heard Gerald Wilton came and went." She paused. "We've been talking." She nodded at the young man with the document. "This is Robert Kane. He lost his claim 2 years ago. He's been waiting for someone to tell him there was a way to fight it." Luke held the door open wide. "Come in," he said. They came in, all 6 of them, filling the small house completely. And Abby rose from the table and stood straight, both hands on the back of her chair, and looked out at the faces of the people who had come, not to deliver bad news, not to serve a petition, but to stand on the same side of something. Her eyes swept the room and then found Luke's across the crowded space. And this time, the almost smile made it all the way. They stayed past dark, all 6 of them crowded around Luke's small table and spilling onto the chairs pulled from the wall. And Robert Kane spread his own documents out beside Abby's, and the comparison was immediate and damning. The same filing number sequence, the same commission letterhead, the same language about survey disputes that had appeared word for word in 2 separate cases 2 years apart. "It's a template," Abby said, and the word landed in the room like a struck match. "He used the same template," Robert said. His voice was the steady voice of a man who'd spent 2 years being angry, and was finally being given permission to do something with it. Change the names, change the claim numbers, but the structure is identical. "Which means Hale's office drafted it centrally," Luke said. "This isn't Gerald Wilton freelancing. This is an operation." Martha Greer crossed her arms. "How many people, you think?" "Aldridge said 4 confirmed," Abby said. "Possibly more." She looked at Robert. "Your claim was 2 years ago. Do you know of anyone before you?" Robert looked at the gray-bearded rancher, a man named Prescott, who'd said almost nothing since coming through the door, but whose eyes had been moving over the documents with the attention of someone reading something they'd been waiting a long time to read. "Harlan?" Robert said. Prescott cleared his throat. "My neighbor lost his creek parcel in '72, he said. "Thought it was bad luck and a crooked judge. But if the pattern is what you're saying—" He stopped. "That's 5 years at least, maybe longer." "That's not opportunism," Abby said. "That's an industry." The room was quiet for a moment with the weight of that. "Aldridge needs to know about Robert's documents," Luke said. He was already thinking forward, the way he'd been thinking since Thursday morning, one step ahead of the next problem. Tonight, if possible. Before he files the stay paperwork, he should see that this isn't a single case. "I'll ride to town," Harold Greer said, standing. He was a man of few words and reliable action, and Luke had already decided he liked him considerably. "Take copies," Luke said. "Not the originals. The originals stay here." Harold nodded, and 10 minutes later, he was out the door with duplicates tucked inside his coat. The meeting broke up slowly after that, people drifting out in twos, exchanging words with Abby at the door, pressing her hand or nodding to Luke with the particular gravity of people who have decided to trust someone and want them to know it. The last to leave was Martha. She stood in the doorway and looked at Abby with the direct, assessing look that seemed to be her primary mode of communication. "You need anything," she said. "Anything at all. You send Luke." "I'm capable of sending myself," Abby said. Martha almost smiled. "I know you are," she said. "That's why I said send Luke, so you don't have to." She squeezed Abby's arm once, firm and brief, and walked out into the dark. Abby closed the door
and leaned her back against it and closed her eyes for about 3 seconds. Not long, just enough to let everything settle. And then she opened them and straightened and went to the table to organize the papers. "Leave it," Luke said. "I just need to—" "Abby." He said it the way she said his name when she was drawing a line. She looked up, startled to hear her own method used back at her. He almost smiled. "Leave it. You've been on your feet since 6 this morning. The papers will be here tomorrow." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the papers. Then, without another word, she left them and went to the bedroom and closed the door. And Luke stood in the quiet of the main room for a long time afterward, looking at the documents that represented 48 hours of the hardest, fastest, most consequential work of his life. And then he checked the door latch and spread the blanket on the floor and lay down and was asleep within minutes. He didn't dream. Sunday passed in a controlled kind of tension. Telegrams going out, one reply coming back from Emmett Cole confirming the courier had been dispatched. Harold returning from town with word that Aldridge had received Robert Kane's documents and had said, and these were Harold's exact words, "Tell Harper this changes the scope considerably." Luke didn't know exactly what that meant, but the word considerably felt like good news, and he held on to it. Gerald Wilton did not appear. Neither did Thomas. That silence was its own kind of message. And Luke read it the same way he read the stillness of weather before a front moved through. Not as peace, but as preparation. Abby spent Sunday at the table writing. Not the land records this time, something else. Something she covered with her hand when Luke came too close. And he was respectful enough not to ask. In the afternoon, she went to the well herself to draw water, and he let her, because he'd already learned that preventing Abby from doing things she was capable of doing was both futile and insulting to her. And instead, he stayed within eyesight while pretending to check the fence line, which she almost certainly knew he was doing, and tolerated without comment. Sunday evening, she put down her pen and looked at him across the room. "The baby dropped," she said. Luke went very still. "Dropped." "Lower," she said, patient with his expression. "It means it's not immediate, but it means we're closer than 6 weeks." "How much closer?" "I don't know exactly. Could be 2 weeks, could be 3. She paused. "Could be less." "Is there a doctor in Willow Creek?" he asked. "Dr. Pierce," she said. "He delivered 3 babies last year. Martha told me." She looked at him. "Luke, I've been preparing for this since March. I know what to do." "I don't," he said, plainly, without apology. She looked at him for a moment. "Then I'll teach you," she said, equally plain. "Not tonight, but soon." He nodded. And then, because there was nothing else to say about it, and everything else to think about, and Monday was less than 12 hours away, he went back to checking the saddlebag under the floorboard for the 4th time, which was excessive, and he knew it, and Abby very charitably said nothing. Monday arrived like a verdict. Luke was dressed and had dust saddled before the sun was fully up, and Emmett Cole's courier arrived at the homestead at 7:30. A weathered man of about 50, on a road-tired horse, who handed over a sealed package, confirmed delivery, and turned right back around without stopping for coffee, which told Luke something about how urgently Emmett had dispatched him. Luke broke the seal at the table, with Abby beside him. Emmett Cole had been thorough. 12 pages, handwritten in the precise small script of a man who'd spent a career in official documentation, cross-referencing filing numbers with ledger entries, tracing the chain of custody on claim T1874-229, from the original fraudulent entry through 3 separate commission reviews, each one staffed partly by appointees of Commissioner Hale, each one arriving at conclusions favorable to Wilton-adjacent interests.
On page 9, Emmett had written, "It is my professional determination, based on 31 years in territorial land administration, that the prior claim in question was fabricated post-mortem, that the filing number was assigned outside normal sequence to conceal its state of origin, and that the clerk responsible, one H. Briggs, acted under direction rather than independently. The direction, in my assessment, originated at the commissioner level." At the bottom of the last page, in larger letters than the rest, "I would testify to this in any court you need me in." Abby read that last line twice. Her hand came up and pressed briefly against her mouth. "He'd testify," she said. "He said he would," Luke said. "He's an old man. He'd get on a horse and come to Helena." "If I asked him to," Luke said. "Yes." She looked at him. "You called in the favor." "I called in part of it," Luke said. "This is the rest." She looked back at the pages and was quiet for a moment. And when she spoke again, her voice was careful and even, and clearly working to stay that way. "Luke, if this holds, if Aldridge can use this in the federal inquiry—" "Not just the Reynolds claim," Luke said. "All 5, possibly more." "Gerald Wilton is going to prison," she said. "Not a wish, a calculation." "Gerald Wilton, and Hale, and Briggs, and whoever else touched this," Luke said. "That's not our job to determine. Our job today is to walk into that hearing, if it even proceeds, with enough evidence that nothing Wilton says or does can move the needle." "You think Aldridge stopped the hearing?" "Let's go find out," Luke said. They rode into Willow Creek, and the town felt different. Or maybe they were the ones who were different. Luke couldn't fully separate the two. People looked at them as they came down the main street. Not the staring of Thursday's auction crowd. Not the pitying look Abby had hated so much. Something more considered. A few nods. The woman from the boarding house raised a hand. Cal Jensen was sitting on the fence outside the feed store and stood up straight when he saw them, and touched his hat to Abby, and she nodded back at him in a way that said everything about what his testimony had meant. The land office was locked. A notice posted on the door read, "Proceedings suspended pending federal inquiry. Inquiries to be directed to the Office of the Federal Land Examiner, Montana Territory." Abby read it once. Then she pressed her hand flat against the posted notice, palm to paper, like she needed to feel the reality of it, like reading it wasn't quite enough. "It's done," Luke said beside her. "It's started," she corrected. "The inquiry is started. The hearing is suspended. The claim is protected." She turned to him. "That's what's done." "I'll take it," he said. "So will I," she said. They found Aldridge at the hotel dining room, eating breakfast with 2 men Luke didn't recognize. Federal men by the look of them, with a particular clothing and posture of people who'd traveled from somewhere more official. Aldridge looked up when they came in and stood, and the 2 men stood with him. "Harper," he said. "Mrs. Harper, good timing." He gestured at his companions. "These are examiners Walsh and Doyle, out of the Federal Land Office in Washington. They arrived last night." Luke looked at him. "Washington." "When I telegraphed my preliminary findings Friday evening," Aldridge said, with a careful understatement of a man who'd been working on this longer than anyone knew, "it turned out this case had been flagged at the federal level for some time. Mr. Walsh and Mr. Doyle were already in transit." Walsh, the older of the 2, with sharp eyes and a precise manner, looked at the package under Luke's arm. "Is that the Cole report?" "It is," Luke said, and handed it over. Walsh untied it and read the first page, standing, and then looked up at his partner with an expression that contained a great deal of compressed professional satisfaction.
"This is sufficient," he said. "More than sufficient." "Sufficient for what?" Abby asked directly. Walsh looked at her. "For a formal arrest warrant, Mrs. Harper. For Commissioner Hale and at least 2 members of his office." He paused. "We'll need to build the full case before trial, but the warrant, that can be issued today." The dining room was not entirely empty. 3 other guests sat at separate tables, and they were all very carefully not listening, which meant they were listening to every word. Luke was aware of this, and so, he could tell by the slight angle of her chin, was Abby. "And Gerald Wilton?" she said. "Wilton will be charged under federal statute for land fraud conspiracy," Walsh said. "He and his son both." He looked at his notes. "An arson charge under federal statute if the Jensen boys' testimony holds." "It'll hold," Luke said. "Then I'd say," Walsh said, closing the package carefully, "that you've done a considerable portion of our work for us, Mr. Harper." He looked at Abby. "Both of you." Abby said nothing for a moment. Then, "The other families, Robert Kane, Prescott's neighbor, the others, will their cases be reviewed?" Walsh and Doyle exchanged a look. "Part of the federal inquiry," Doyle said. "Any fraudulent displacement of legitimate claims will be reviewed for remedy. We can't promise restitution in every case, but the record will be corrected." Abby pressed her lips together and nodded. It wasn't everything. She knew it wasn't everything. But she accepted it as what it was. Real, forward-moving, and better than nothing, which was what they'd had 5 days ago. They were walking out of the hotel, back into the morning, when Luke heard it. His name. Shouted. Urgent. He turned. Cal Jensen was running down the boardwalk toward them, hat gone, face flushed, running hard. "Harper!" He stopped in front of him, breathing hard. "Thomas Wilton, he's at your place." Everything in Luke went cold and immediate. "What?" "Rode out 20 minutes ago," Cal said. "My brother saw him turn up your road. Alone, but—" Cal swallowed. He had a rifle across his saddle. Luke looked at Abby. She was already looking at him, and her face was the steady face, the set jaw face. But under it, something else. Something that had to do with the baby and the house and the saddlebag under the floorboard, and all the things that still needed protecting. "Go," she said. "You're not staying here alone." "I'm staying with Aldridge and 2 federal examiners," she said, fast and firm. "Go." He went. He rode dust harder than he'd ridden him in years, out of town and up the road and over the rise, and he could see from 100 yards out that the front door of the house was open. He'd closed it when they left. He knew he had. And Thomas Wilton's bay horse was tied at the post, the white sock on the left foreleg, exactly where Cal Jensen had said it would be. Luke came off dust at a run. He went through the open door, and Thomas Wilton was standing in the middle of the room with the saddlebag in his hands. Open. Documents scattered across the floor. And the rifle propped against the wall behind him. Because Thomas hadn't expected anyone back this fast. The 2 men looked at each other. "Put it down," Luke said. Thomas looked at the saddlebag in his hands, then at Luke. Something moved through his face. The calculation of a man working through how badly he'd miscalculated. "This is evidence," he said. "Against my father."
"You know what this does to my family?"
"I know what your family did to other families," Luke said. "Put it down."
"I put this down. My father goes to prison."
"Your father is going to prison either way," Luke said. "Aldridge has enough without what's in that bag. Walsh and Doyle are filing the warrant this morning." He kept his eyes on Thomas, steady and direct. "The only question now is what you do in the next 30 seconds. Thomas's jaw worked. His hands tightened on the saddlebag. "You don't know what it's like," he said, and the voice that came out was younger than his face, younger than his actions. The voice of a man who had done terrible things, partly out of his own calculation, and partly out of his father's expectations, and who was now standing in the wreckage of both. "My whole life he told me the land was everything, that we had to protect what was ours." "That land wasn't yours," Luke said. "It was never yours." Thomas looked at the scattered documents on the floor. He looked at the receipts in Abby's handwriting. He looked at Cal Jensen's signed statement. He looked at 12 pages of Emmett Cole's meticulous, damning truth. And then, with the slow, particular movement of a man who has made a decision and is not entirely at peace with it, but has made it anyway, he set the saddlebag down on the table. "I didn't know about the dead man," Thomas said. "The prior claim. I didn't know it was fabricated." He swallowed. "I knew the land office thing was... I knew it wasn't clean. But I didn't know about Briggs. I didn't know about Hale." Luke looked at him for a long moment. "Tell that to Walsh," he said. "Federal examiner. He's at the hotel in town." He paused. "Tell him everything you knew and everything you didn't. All of it. Right now, before your father's lawyer gets to you and tells you to say nothing." He held Thomas's gaze. "It's the only thing that helps you now." Thomas looked at the floor, at the documents, at his own hands. "My father," he said. Your father made his choices," Luke said. "Not cruel, just final. You're making yours." Thomas Wilton picked up his hat from the table. He looked at Luke one more time, and the look had none of the aggression of Thursday's wrist grip, and none of the performance of Sunday night's visit. It was the look of someone who'd run out of everything except the truth. He walked past Luke and out the door, and a moment later Luke heard the bay horse moving out of the yard at a trot. Luke stood alone in the room and looked at the scattered documents on the floor. He gathered them up one by one, careful and methodical, checking each one. And when he was certain everything was accounted for, he repacked the saddlebag and put it back under the floorboard, and replaced the plank and stood on it for a moment, as if the weight of his own body was a final confirmation. Then he rode back to town. He found Abby outside the hotel with Martha Greer, who had apparently materialized out of civic instinct. When she saw Luke ride up alone, Abby walked to him before he'd fully dismounted. "Thomas?" she said. "Gone to turn himself in," Luke said. "Or close enough." Her breath went out. "You're all right?" "I'm fine," he said. He looked at her, really looked, the way he hadn't let himself look in the days of moving too fast to stop. And what he saw was a woman who had been through more in 5 days than most people went through in 5 years, and was still standing, still forward-facing, still asking after him before she asked after herself. "You're all right?" he asked back. She looked at him and almost laughed, which was the best possible answer. "I'm all right," she said. Martha cleared her throat with the diplomatic precision of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. "I'll just," she said, and walked away. They stood on the boardwalk in the Monday morning heat, and behind them, Walsh and Doyle were already in motion. Horses arriving, riders dispatching, the machinery of federal law doing the slow and irresistible work it did when it finally turned its attention to something. "It's going to take time," Abby said. She was watching the federal men with the clear-eyed realism that was one of her most consistent qualities. "The inquiry, the trial. It won't be fast." "No," Luke said. "Gerald will have lawyers." "He will." "And Hale will fight it." "He will," Luke said. "But he'll fight it from a cell, eventually. And your claim is protected while the inquiry runs. That's what matters right now." She nodded slowly. That's what matters right now, she agreed. Then her hand went to her side, and she went very still. Luke saw it immediately. Abby. I'm fine, she said, but her voice had changed. It had the careful, measured quality of someone monitoring something. That's not your fine voice, Luke said. That's your I'm managing voice. Those are different. She looked at him with something that was equal parts surprise and exasperation and affection. You've known me 5 days, she said. 4.5, he said. How far apart? She pressed her lips together. Since this morning, she said quietly. About 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Luke did the arithmetic in about 1 second. He turned and looked down the street for Aldridge, for Walsh, for Harold Greer, for literally anyone useful, and found Martha, who had not actually gone anywhere, which confirmed his instinct that she was the most reliably present person in Willow Creek. Martha, he said. She was already walking toward them. She took one look at Abby's face and said, Harold, go get Dr. Pierce, to her husband, who had also not gone anywhere. And Harold went at a speed that belied his general demeanor of calm. I can walk, Abby said.
Nobody said you couldn't, Martha said, and took her arm anyway. And Luke took her other side. And between them, they walked Abby down the street to the boarding house, where there was a proper bed and a room on the ground floor. And by the time they got her settled, Dr. Pierce was already coming through the door with his bag. Luke stood in the hallway outside the room with his hat in his hands and felt, for the first time in 5 days, completely at a loss. Martha came out after a few minutes and looked at him. She's fine, she said. Pierce says it's moving slowly. Could be hours. Hours, Luke said. That's normal, Martha said. First babies take their time. She paused. Usually. Usually, Luke repeated. Go sit down, Martha said, not unkindly. You look like a man who's been awake since Thursday. I have been awake since Thursday, he said. Then sit down and be awake sitting, she said, and pushed him toward the chair at the end of the hall. He sat. He turned his hat in his hands. He listened to the sounds from the room, voices, movement. Abby's voice once, clear and sharp, and then steady again, and Dr. Pierce's low response. At one point, Aldridge came by and told him Thomas Wilton had walked into the hotel and asked to speak with Walsh, and was currently giving a full account of everything he knew. Luke received this information and thanked him, and Aldridge looked at the closed door and then at Luke, and seemed to understand that whatever was happening behind that door was more important than anything happening in the rest of Willow Creek, and left without further conversation. At another point, Cal Jensen appeared at the end of the hall, hat in hand, and said, Mr. Harper? And Luke said, She's fine, Cal. And Cal nodded and went away. And then, after a time that felt both very long and very compressed, the door opened and Dr. Pierce stepped out and looked at Luke and nodded. Luke was on his feet before the nod finished. Boy, Pierce said. Healthy. Good lungs. He paused. She's asking for you. Luke went in. The room was warm, and the afternoon light was coming through the thin curtains, and Abby was sitting up against the pillows, with her hair loose around her shoulders. And in her arms was something so small and so present and so entirely itself that Luke stopped 2 steps inside the door because his legs made a quiet internal decision to be cautious. She looked up at him. Her face was exhausted and luminous and more open than he'd ever seen it. All the careful control set aside, every wall down, and she looked at him with those gray-green eyes and said, Come here. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the chair beside the bed and looked at the baby. The baby had dark hair and a face that was red and suspicious about everything, and very, very alive. He's, Luke started. Remarkable, Abby said, the way a person says a word they've been saving for something worthy of it. Yes, Luke said.
He is. She looked down at the baby and then up at Luke and said quietly, "His name is Daniel James." Luke looked at her. "James," he said. "You told me your middle name last night," she said, "when you thought I was asleep." She held his gaze. "I wasn't." Something moved through Luke Harper from somewhere he'd locked a long time ago, deep and warm and unguarded, and he didn't try to name it or contain it. He let it be there. He sat in the chair beside the bed in the afternoon light and looked at a woman he'd married as a stranger 4 days ago, and a child who bore his middle name and the name of a man he'd never met, but had come, in 5 days, to understand. "Abby," he said. "Don't say anything important right now," she said softly. "I'm very tired and I'll cry, and I've managed not to cry since Thursday." "You cried," he said. "A little, Thursday night." "That doesn't count," she said. "I was provoked." He almost laughed. She almost laughed.
Daniel James Reynolds. Harper opened his eyes briefly, apparently unimpressed, and closed them again. The sun moved. The room settled. Outside, the business of Monday continued. Federal examiners and warrants, and the long, grinding work of justice, moving forward at the speed justice moved, which was slower than anyone wanted, and faster than it used to be. Somewhere in that building of events, Gerald Wilton's carefully constructed world was coming apart at the seams, and Commissioner Hale was preparing to explain himself to people who outranked him, and 5 families who had lost land they shouldn't have lost were beginning to understand that someone had found their names in the record. But in this room, none of that was the most important thing. In this room, Abby Harper held her son with both hands, the same hands that had pressed flat on her belly in front of a crowd, and kept receipts in her pocket, and signed her name to a marriage, and written land records by lamplight, and built a case from nothing in 2 days. And she looked at the child she had carried through the hardest months of her life, and her face was a thing Luke Harper knew he would carry for the rest of his own. He reached out and took her hand. Not beside his this time, not almost touching, but fully, completely, without qualification. And she let him. And her fingers closed around his, and she didn't say anything, and neither did he, because there was nothing to say that the gesture didn't already contain. Abby Reynolds had stood in an auction circle with nothing but her dignity and her receipts and the refusal to look away. And she had walked out of it with her land, her child, her justice, and a man worth standing next to. She had not been saved. She had saved herself, and in doing so, had given Luke Harper back something he hadn't known he'd lost until she walked into his life and showed him what it looked like to fight for something worth keeping. Some people come into your life like weather, loud and sudden and impossible to ignore. Abby came in like water finding its level, steady, inevitable, and permanent. And in a small room in Willow Creek, Montana, on a Monday in the summer of 1874, with the sun going long and gold through the curtains, and a new life breathing quietly between them, Luke and Abby Harper began, without ceremony, without announcement, and without any doubt at all, the rest of their lives.